Welcome to the Black Magic Woman podcast with Mundanara Bayles.
When you look at our mob, everyone thought we were just going to die out, but we haven't.
Probably the most adaptable people on the planet.
It's this emergence of this humanality again that I find so enriching.
Be wise, be wise, be wise. Look at ways to cost save so that at the end of the day, your door's still open.
Waddamoollie, and welcome to Black Magic Woman's first ever podcast. My name is Mundanara Bayles, and I'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the traditional owners of whose land that we're gathered on today. And right now, I'm on Gubbi Gubbi country, also pronounced as Cubbi Cubbi country here on the Sunshine Coast. It's a beautiful day outside. But I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land, on wherever you are listening to this podcast, around Australia or even around the world. I also want to acknowledge the elders, our elders that are past, our elders that are present, and thank them for paving the way. And I guess we always should acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. In starting this podcast, I'd like to start off with an introduction based on Aboriginal terms of reference. And in saying that, I should just give a description or a definition around the protocol that I just carried out, which is the acknowledgement of traditional owners. And it's an important diplomatic tradition that's been in practice in this country by Aboriginal peoples for tens of thousands of years. So when we visit each other's country, we're acknowledging that we're a visitor on country. Whereas the welcome to country is quite different. If I was a traditional owner, I could welcome you to country, but I'm a visitor here and I followed out that diplomatic tradition. You can have a cultural immersion wherever you are in this country. You don't have to go as far as Uluru to immerse yourselves in Aboriginal culture. If you're a non-Aboriginal person living in this country, now known as Australia, I would say the acknowledgement is like an invitation for you to be part of the oldest continuous culture in the planet, that you can become part of our culture when you take on some of the same obligations and responsibilities that our people have done for tens of thousands of years. Instead of seeing the acknowledgement as being politically correct, from my perspective, political correctness came in yesterday compared to how long our people have lived in this country. So the acknowledgement to me is for all of us to participate in and to be part on, so that we can ensure that our history stretches as far in front of us as it does behind us, as my Aunt Lila once said to me. So in terms of the Aboriginal terms of reference, the introduction I want to do is about building relationships and getting to know each other based on who I am and not what I do. And what I do will come next, and I'll introduce the black card and share a bit of our history. But first and foremost, I think it's important that we start with understanding a bit of my background as an individual, as a human being. So I grew up in Redfern. I'm one of 8 daughters, and my father came from central Queensland, and his people are the Birigubba. More in particular, his clan are the Wiri people of the Birigubba Nation in North Queensland. And his grandmother's country was Gungaloo country, just outside of Rockhampton, a place called Theodore. The Dawson River is a very special place to my family, and my dad used to, identify as a Dawson River Murray. And my dad's no longer with us, and my mum's also passed. My mother came from Redfern, and I could say we go back at least 5 generations to Redfern and have a deep connection with Redfern and very much part of the Redfern Aboriginal community, but we're not Gadigal people. My mother's people come from the Hunter Valley of New South Wales, which is outside of Newcastle, a little place called Singleton. And my mother was taken as a little girl, and so was her mother. And so was her mother. And when I think about it, I would be the first generation on my mother's side that wasn't forcibly removed under government policy. So when we're talking about history in this country, when we're not talking about that long ago, I would say it's in people's living memories of what happened in our families in regards to past policies. So my mother's father was an Irishman, and my mum had red hair and freckles and looked as Irish as they come, but definitely identified as an Aboriginal woman. We didn't get to meet her father. But I'd like to continue my, introduction by acknowledging my Irish ancestry, as my mother did, even though I identify as an Aboriginal woman. I married a Kiwi-born Fijian, so I met my husband about 12 years ago here in Brisbane. I've been living in Brisbane for the last 25 years of my life. My dad's a Queenslander. My mum was from New South Wales. I haven't jumped ship. I still go for New South Wales when the football was on, the state of origin. My children, I guess they identify as both, all three Aboriginal, Kiwi, Fijian, and have a strong connection, definitely with their Aboriginal heritage, but also now with their Fijian heritage because we got married in Fiji a couple of years ago. So we speak different languages at home, bits of the Fijian language, bits of my mother's Wonnarua language, but also Aboriginal English, which is a recognised language. And I think it's really important to understand that, when our people got moved onto missions and reserves, that there was no English-speaking schools set up. So we all self-taught the English language, I guess. And therefore, we've given added meanings to the same English words that we use. So when I talk about family, I'm not just talking about my immediate family. I could be talking about my extended family or even my non-blood family, and even members of my community. So I guess it's just one example of Aboriginal English, but it's definitely not standard Australian English. So I speak Aboriginal English, which is a recognised language. And in saying that, it's not Pidgin and it's not Creole, because Pidgin and Creole, that's spoken in mainly northern parts of Australia and up around the Torres Strait Islands and Papua New Guinea, is a native language that's mixed with the English language. So I definitely don't speak Creole or Pidgin or a broken English. I speak an Aboriginal English. So in terms of home in this land, Redfern will always be my home. I've also got connections to Bundjalung country through my mother's grandfather, who was a Roberts. I think he was one of 13 brothers from around Ballina, Byron Bay. And because my nan was removed as a small child, we don't know much about her father, and therefore don't have a strong connection to his country, which is Bundjalung country. So I live in Brisbane with my 5 kids, and I'd say about 7 years ago, Aunt Lilla, which is my grandmother's sister, also known as Dr. Lilla Watson, Aunt Lilla came to me after a conversation on the radio with my dad, who used to run a national radio talkback program called Let's Talk. And Dad was talking to the mayor of Palm Island around this black card. And Alf Lacey, who's still the mayor there in Palm Island, was actually sharing his frustration during this interview with a journalist. And you can actually look it up on the web. That's 2008, and you can see the transcript there. And Alf basically says that he was, the community as a whole was frustrated with service providers flying in and out of Palm Island, which is an island off Townsville, and 20 minutes in a small plane you can get there. So a lot of service providers fly in and out from Townsville. Now, Palm Island has a very rich history and a very sad history as well, in terms of it was set up as a punishment island or even as a prison, a penal colony for where Aboriginal people under the Queensland Protection Act would be sent there for punishment if they, didn't obey the authority on those reserves. So he was basically saying how people fly in and out of Palm Island, and with either little knowledge of Aboriginal people, culture and the history of Palm Island, or with no knowledge at all. And they're there to do a service and work with community, but with no knowledge of the people in that community. So what he was saying, that if people came here with a black card, what it would say is that they've got some level of understanding or experience of working with our mob, and therefore they're the right people to be engaging with our mob in community. So he was basically saying that when these service providers turn up, it's like the community have to do cultural awareness workshops or cultural awareness, informal settings of educating people before they can actually go and engage. And that usually took up a lot of the time of those service providers, and therefore they would leave without even doing what they were there to do, because they've been learning about the people and the culture and some of the complexities, but also about some of the challenges in the community. And before you know it, another service provider would fly in, and the community was doing the same thing over and over and over again. And this is over decades and decades of mainstream Australia engaging with Aboriginal society and Aboriginal communities. So this concept of black card has been around for quite some time. And I could just point to one article, online, which was Alf Lacey. But my dad also spoke to Aunt Lilla and Aunt Mary Graham on his show. The regular feature or the regular spot on his show was the aunties, and they were talking about this black card. And Aunt Lilla said to Aunt Mary, why don't we just do this this black card. Now, based on Auntie Lila and Auntie Mary's time at the University of Queensland back in the 80s, they developed 3 courses for the University of Queensland: Aboriginal Perspectives, Aboriginal Approaches to Knowledge, and Aboriginal Politics. Those 3 courses were taught to both undergrad and postgrad students over 3 semesters back in the 80s, and they taught them together. And those courses, I guess, led to the Black Card training and the Black Card being born. So that's a company that I set up with my grandmother's sister, Aunt Lila Watson, but with, support from Annie Mary Graham and Uncle Charlie Watson. So the 3 elders, I have a presentation that I do, or a lecture or a keynote that I give at universities, and the topic is Small Business, Big Responsibility in Business with My Elders. And it's a photo of the 3 elders and myself. And I guess it's been an absolute privilege and an honour to be in business with my grandmother's sister. Now, in Birrigabba language, grandmother is Bibi, and Bibi Na is grandmother's sister. So I would refer to my Aunt Lila as Bibi Na in our language. So it's been an absolute privilege to be in business with my Bibi. And I guess moving forward and where we are today, we've set up this company that delivers cultural education and training programs known as the Black Card Training, which is really a university level education. It's about understanding Aboriginal society, Aboriginal governance, Aboriginal logic, Aboriginal perspectives, Aboriginal approaches to teaching and learning. We're drawing from tens of thousands of years of our people living in this country. This accumulated knowledge that's either evolved or developed out of this land is what we're referring to when we speak about Aboriginal terms of reference. And it's interesting that, as soon as you start talking about things like reconciliation or lateral violence and other interesting conversations, Auntie Lila always reminds me about not being drawn over into white terms of reference. And I know I understand it's taken me years to come to this point. So being in business with my grandmother's sister and educating people around the country, I would say that we got our first big contract, or our first kind of, run on the board with Commonwealth Bank. So we've condensed it from the 3-semester university course into a 2-day intensive. And when CommBank knocked on our door, they basically was after a framework that would underpin or support their reconciliation action plan. It was going to be their first Elevate level RAP. Now, when you understand the Reconciliation Action Plan program, or the RAP program, there's 4 levels of a RAP. There's the Reflect, where people are on the start of their journey. Then there's the Innovate, which is the next level. Then there's the Stretch RAP. And a lot of organisations are at their Innovate or even Stretch level. So the Elevate is the top level of the RAP program. And that's where, it comes with big targets around procurement, which is obviously buying from Indigenous businesses, and also about employment. And one of their targets was trying to reach parity in terms of having 3% of their workforce identifying as Indigenous by 2026. So a very big target there for a very big corporate with about 50,000 staff, but not unrealistic when you think about the hundreds of thousands of young people that we got coming through the ranks. So in terms of having an Elevate level RAP that had a framework that supported it around cultural capability, I guess they wasn't just ticking a box. They really wanted the foundations at CBA to be there. So if the RAP fell over, that cultural capability framework would be core business to the bank. So they engaged with us to do this big piece of work about 5 years ago. So we developed a cultural capability framework based on Aboriginal terms of reference for the Commonwealth Bank. And we've been implementing that framework over the last 4 years. And I'm pretty sure we've engaged with at least between 600 to 800 CBA employees over the last 4 years in a 1-day face-to-face program. So developing that framework, it was really important that we did this piece of work on our terms, that we developed the content and this framework based on Aboriginal terms of reference. So it's a unique piece of work. And when you look at frameworks out there that different organisations, different government departments are using, I would say that they're not based on Aboriginal terms of reference. whereas ours is. So it's unique in that sense. I think what's important is Commonwealth Bank signed over the IP to the framework to Black Card a couple of years ago, which then allowed us to grow our business and to go and engage with other businesses around doing cultural audits to actually map where their organisation already sat on our continuum so that they could actually achieve and progress along our continuum to reach cultural capability. So the framework was our first big piece of work, and it kind of got us out there, and we were able to start participating. I wouldn't say competing, because once I start thinking about competition, then we're going back to me being drawn over into white terms of reference. I'm aware of that. It's really about us participating in this market, or participating in the business world. An Indigenous business out there trying to engage with the rest of Australia and now with the rest of the world about how Aboriginal people lived in this country for tens of thousands of years without ever taking over someone else's country. No invasions in this country. No wars over land. How do you have a stable, efficient society that lasted over tens of thousands of years and nobody ever went to war over land? I think it's an example that is nowhere else in the world. So the Black Card essentially, started from delivering training, doing some consulting for CommBank, and now look where we are today, COVID-19, where, if anything, being probably the most adaptable people on the planet, when you think of Aboriginal people and what we've faced and the challenges that we've faced, and what's happened to us, in the last 250 years to where we are today. Here I am now doing a podcast, sharing our journey and sharing our business and hopefully sharing not just some of the challenges, especially what we're facing today when you look at the current climate, but also some of our successes and some of the things that we're thinking about and things that we're doing that we never thought about doing before, or we didn't have time to do that before COVID-19, came on the scene. So I guess in this podcast, I really wanted to introduce myself, talk about the Black Card, and also share, I guess, where we're at in this current situation that we're now launching our first ever podcast. So to me, being innovative right now and even reinventing Black Card and thinking about life for the next 6 months at least, how are we going to engage with our clients and deliver our training when relationships is at the core of what we're teaching? How to get along with your neighbours without taking each other out, the philosophy behind that, the genius behind that. And I think right now, more than ever before, we need to think about building relationships. I think it's critical. We need to think about empathy, which is at the core of emotional intelligence. How do we understand the needs of, especially the Indigenous business sector? I think it's a sector that's still quite immature. It's still at an early growth, but growing quite rapidly as we speak. I think we need to reinforce with some of our clients, especially from Black Card's perspective, that it's really important that you don't forget why you invested in us in the first place. Even though the landscape is quite different right now and quite challenging for a lot of businesses, especially the Indigenous business sector, we still need each other. We still need to keep doing business. When you think about employment, the public service is the highest employer of Indigenous people in this country, but second are Indigenous businesses. Research still shows that Aboriginal people employ Aboriginal people. So in terms of your procurement, and you've got targets in your RAP, this is a time to start moving your targets forward. We need to keep doing business with the rest of the world, and we need to keep doing what we've always done, to be resilient, to adapt to the current climate, to think of other ways of engaging and even invent new revenue streams. And I guess at Black Card, we just piloted a virtual Black Card program, which was like a 3-hour condensed program so that we could, I guess, substitute for the time being our one-day face-to-face, that we could bring people online via Zoom. So that's something that we're actually going to offer. We can see the value in it. The message is still the same, to be culturally capable, to be better human beings How do we build relationships? How do we take care of each other? How do we, for us to think about each other and the importance on people's health and well-being, especially the vulnerable and people that are elderly, and especially when you think of Indigenous people and Indigenous communities and the risk to Indigenous people in terms of our health and well-being, more susceptible, I guess, to COVID-19. So thinking about all of that and trying to run a business and trying to, keep food on the table in my household, and I've got about 5 staff, I'm trying to think of, what does their life look like after June 30? So I know that we've got enough cash flow in the bank to probably just get us to June 30. And, I want to keep working towards rolling out our training, keeping our current contracts, committing, delivering, and hopefully coming up with other options and other opportunities in terms of different deliveries of learning. So in terms of the next podcast, I want to actually talk to other Indigenous businesses about their current situation, some of their challenges, or even the opportunities. I want to talk to just everyday people that are engaging with the Indigenous business sector, and maybe some of the things that they could share with us that might be of value to some of the people listening to this podcast. But at the end of the day, we need to, really at the end of the day, we need to stay positive. We need to look after each other and just, think about, I think, life, not just currently, but life after this. So not to get too down on the current situation and to reach out to each other. I know online we've got Facebook, we've got LinkedIn, we've got online communities to support each other, and lots of information has been circulated out there, especially around the stimulus package. So I know that with businesses, there's, I was talking to the Commonwealth Bank this morning, and they were basically saying that there's loans of up to $250,000 that you can apply for that has no interest attached to those loans unless you use that money. And I want to talk to people at the Commonwealth Bank and other people in the finance industry to give us some advice on what is on offer and what can we access other than just the current government stimulus packages. So on that note, I just want to say thank you for joining me on this podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, and looking forward to regular episodes. And stay in touch with us. There's the Black Card Facebook page, our Twitter, our Instagram, also our LinkedIn page. So, keep up to date, stay connected, and take care of each other. So, Waddamoolie.